healthy thing. Okay, in all affairs, it's a healthy thing now and then to hang a question mark on the things you have long taken for granted. That's quote number one. Quote number two, do not fear to be eccentric in opinion, for every opinion now accepted was once eccentric. Quote number two, and now quote number three, I shouldn't wish people dogmatically to believe any philosophy, not even mine. These quotes are not from me, but from the great Bertrand Russell.
Bruno,
however,
Bruno, if I may interrupt, do you want to share your PowerPoint slide?
Well, that's what I'm doing.
It is not showing up here.
Oh, okay.
Can you
so what should I do?
Yeah, click the share button at the bottom of the
share screen. Yes. Okay. Problem is that I don't see my slides here on this window. Partager. Okay. Share.
Yes, I think it is coming.
No. Now?
Yeah, I think it is coming. I think because of the probably network connections, it is taking a little longer, but we can see your screen now.
Okay, fine.
That's perfect. Working.
Do you see the three quotes?
Yes, yes.
And the galaxy?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So basically what I was saying is that these quotes by Bertrand Russell, I totally agree with the three of them. You might disagree though. This is fine by me, but I think it's better for the coming hour or hour and a half if you agree with the three of them. I always start my own courses with the three quotes, and I repeat it every time. So I thought, well, okay, we change coasts. We are on the Pacific coast now, on the West Coast, but Bertrand Russell is still right, at least in my opinion. All right? So another galaxy. The reason why I show that is just because I think the picture is beautiful. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about astrophysics. I'd love to, but I'm not sure that I'm really competent for that. So this is the title of the course that you are in right now. And this is me, Bruno della Chiesa. I will be introducing Pierre Bourdieu's notions of doxa, habitus, and forms of capital, which means basically that I'm going to do something unusual for me now, presenting stuff that is not mine, or not completely. I will add a few elements here and there, but basically these notions have been extremely influential ever since I met with Pierre Bourdieu in Paris 40 years ago or something like that. This doesn't make me feel any younger, I'm afraid, but it's the reality. And these three notions have actually changed not only my academic path, but a lot of things in my life. That's it. So this is what we are going to do now in this Ed 126 course on February the 6th, 2025. To begin with a few guessing games in order to, get started, get the ball rolling. And I invite you to just play with me. All right? What do you see?
Can you speak louder?
13, B, capital B.
13, B, okay. B, 13. If I tell you, yeah, that's it, basically. If I tell you that up is a B and down is a 13, it probably doesn't make much sense to you. But if I show you the full picture, it will make sense. This is categorical perception. If you see only a little part of the full picture, it is impossible to decide whether you see a B or a 13. And we are constantly confronted with problems of that kind, I'm afraid. Yeah, so that was an easy one. Let's go for something a bit different. These two pictures were actually part of an advertising campaign for a bank some years ago. Do not worry, I won't mention the bank. I had nothing to do with it. Never worked with a bank, never will. Now the point is, that you saw these pictures advertising campaign in many airports all around the world, and it was very simple. In the beginning, you saw the two pictures, double each, and you had one word attached to each of them. Good, bad, and then bad, good.
Bruno,
This is the
Bruno, sorry
Yes.
for the interruption. On the screen that okay, I think there is something at the, in French, one-liner. I am not sure what is it, but
okay. Yeah, I will try to, but yeah, all right, sorry. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought it was coming from you, but well, since it was in French, it was probably coming from here. Thanks, Monk. Okay, now we're fine. So you see the ad, and there was on top of that just the name of the bank and the slogan. We understand the differences of perspectives. You had other duos of pictures, like for instance these two, and again these two. Now try to guess. You can start to try to guess what kind of picture was under useful, useless. And of course, the reverse. Apparently, some of the, do you see the pointer here on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Some pharmaceutical companies protested the advertising campaign because of this one. But apparently it was not particularly useful, the protest. Anyway. Now, try to guess. We won't spend much time on it but we could try to guess what sort of words were used here. These two are adjectives. So you guess for yourself in your heads. Okay. Well, a lot of things are possible, obviously. What they chose was this. Perfect, imperfect. Like that, maybe. Okay. Same thing. These were the two pictures, a laptop and a beautiful baby face. Again, there were two words attached to these two pictures. These times they are nouns. Okay? Play for some, work for others. Or sometimes play, sometimes work. Maybe sometimes both, actually. And now I give you the two words, holiday and hell, and you try to guess what kind of pictures were used to illustrate these two notions, holiday, hell. You can think about it for yourself. The first one was this. And the second one was that. Well, if you ask me, it's hell in both cases anyway, but okay. You may consider that it's holiday in both cases. Why not? Or it's both, again, holiday and hell. Now look at this, cloud of dots. This is the way I perceive data. For instance, statistics and indicators. A cloud of dots that apparently does not make any sense. But then you start to add some prism to perceive this cloud of dots, and the data transforms into information. Like, for instance, on a TV news, the dots are aligned, sort of. Do they make sense? Not really, but at least it doesn't look like a complete mess. But it is only information. That was data, that is information. Now, consider this. Some of you at least may remember that as children, we actually played a game supposed to teach us the number line, I suspect, where we had to draw a line with a pencil between dots with numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth, until suddenly the cloud of dots started to make sense. This is knowledge. We combine the dots in a creative manner, and we produce knowledge. This doesn't make sense. This, however, does make sense. It's an elephant, of course. Now, I don't know how you played that game, but I remember how I played it quite a while ago. I never finished any drawing because I didn't like that anyway. So I just, connected the dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until I recognized what the shape was. I said, oh, it's an elephant, or it's a truck, or a squirrel, or whatever. And then I moved to the next one because I was not interested in the drawing. I was just interested in recognizing the shape. This is the way we transform data into information and information into knowledge. At least this is a way to present it, a kind of metaphor or allegory. Not to know is bad. Not wanting to know is worse. It is supposed to be an African proverb. I didn't check whether it really exists as an African proverb, but you see what I mean. Again, an elephant. When I was a kid, or even when I was your age, it was not elephants that were supposed to behave like that, but ostriches. This might be a result of climate change. I do not know, but anyway, not wanting to know is worse than not to know, that not knowing. And now consider this. This is the last one of this kind of warm-up. This is yet another ad. Can you guess what kind? So I just took out the text. Can you guess what kind of product is supposed to be promoted by these three pictures? Medication. What is sold? Sorry?
Medication.
I didn't hear it.
Medication.
Medication, yes. What kind of medication?
Antidepressants, maybe.
For instance, yeah. That could be, yes. Or
vitamins.
Vitamins. Yes, vitamins or painkillers or whatever you want. Something like that. Yeah. So you get it. Perfect. Thank you. Now, if I tell you now that this advertising campaign probably belongs in the Guinness Book of Records as the worst advertising campaign ever, because the results were not exactly what was expected. Actually, the results were the following. Not only the pharmaceutical company who was selling that product did not sell any more products, but even the people who used to buy this pill or whatever that is massively stopped buying it. Can you guess why? What was so wrong with this ad campaign?
They thought it would make you feel really good and it only helped a little bit.
Okay, she's saying they thought it will help a lot, but it only helped a little bit.
Why? Why not? It's not exactly the main problem, but it could be. Yeah, it could be. But it's something else.
First slide, frame them as like mad people, moody people, I guess. Like the campaign framed them as like that first picture right there.
Okay, so the way campaign was framed in the picture.
What was framed?
Can you speak louder?
Like that first emotion where they look mad.
Yeah.
Like that was what people saw, and the campaign was framing them as that, so they probably just stopped buying the product.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's a very good idea, actually. That's another good idea, but it's not the main reason anyway.
There is one more.
Yeah.
It looks like the person in the middle is yawning, like you can't actually really, like it doesn't totally seem like someone's taking medication.
So the person in the middle looked like yawning.
Oh, well, interesting. I never heard that before. That's right. Yeah, it's true actually. But again, that was not the problem. I will tell you what the problem was with this campaign. The campaign was designed in Germany for a German pharmaceutical company which sold products like this, whatever that is, again, antidepressant, painkiller, whatever. They sold this product in Northern Africa, where people read in Arabic. That means from right to left, and they saw that. Of course, those who designed the ad did not think about it. But when you see this, who would buy a product like that? This is a form of ethnocentric approach. They simply did not think about the fact that Arabic is read in the other direction, if I may say so, and that people perfectly naturally, between quotation marks, naturally, would read it or would decipher it that way. Ethnocentrism at its best. As we will see a bit further, ethnocentrism is not limited to advertising companies. It is all over the place, including in science. Okay, now, one thing I want to share before we dive into the real subject of my talk tonight. Thanks to brain plasticity, you've heard of it, the synaptic plasticity of the brain, lifelong synaptic plasticity, you actually can teach an old dog new tricks. Look at that. Because of this, I believe, and not only because of that, but also because of that, I believe in the perfectibility, meaning the capacity to improve of humankind to begin with. I believe in the perfectibility, in the capacity to improve of human beings. Thus, I believe in the educability of human beings. This is one of the reasons, it's not the only one, but one of the reasons why I cannot be conservative. And I am not, as you will understand pretty soon. However, if you are, it is not necessarily a problem for this talk. We might have very lively exchanges at the end. Don't hesitate to challenge me if you feel like it. There's no problem at all with that, quite the opposite. But okay, you've been warned, I'm not conservative, and if you consider the labels used in the US for political leanings, I am not even a liberal. I am much more left-wing than that. All right. Now, what kind of left-wing, that I'm not sure, but anyway. So you know, you are warned. And before giving definitions of doxa, habitus, and capital, I would like to tell you a little story that you can check online maybe, or at the university library. I'm pretty sure they have that in Santa Barbara as well. Something I call the Bernal Diaz syndrome. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, some of you may have heard of him, but not necessarily everybody. It is not a household name, as they say. Bernal Diaz was a member of the Cortes expedition that destroyed the Mexica or Aztec Empire in 1519 to 1521. He was one of the sailors who were with Cortes, and he witnessed the whole campaign. An interesting point, though, is that he witnessed the whole thing, and some 40 years later, he wrote an account of what happened in Tenochtitlan, today Mexico City, when they arrived there. And this account is the only written account that we have from an eyewitness. Of course, it is certainly not objective by any measure. It is not neutral at all. Quite the opposite. It's clearly meant to justify what the Cortes clique has done in what is today Mexico. The book that Bernal Diaz wrote is called Historia Verdadera de la Conquista de Nueva España, the true history of the conquest of New Spain. That's the Nueva España, New Spain, the way they called Mexico back then. Well, it is again the only source, the only written source we have by an eyewitness. So, yeah, it is an important book from a historical point of view. However, we know that it's not neutral. And I invite you to find in that book the few pages in which Bernal Diaz describes Moctezuma, the emperor of the Mexica, of the Aztecs back then. He meets, just like the others, he sees Moctezuma, he meets with him in a way, you know, he observes what he's doing and so forth. And he finds, even 40 years later, he explains that the behavior of this man is extremely strange. That the way he moves, the way he talks, the way he eats, and so forth are so strange that he's almost not human. And he explains that, saying, well, the problem is that this guy is an Indian. Again, the word they used back then, as you certainly know. However, if you read the description of Moctezuma's behavior according to Bernal Diaz, you will find something really interesting and, in fact, riveting. I consider it riveting, at least. What he describes is not an Indian, not a Mexica or an Aztec. He describes an emperor. Only Bernal Diaz, who certainly comes from the gutter somewhere in Valladolid or Sevilla or wherever, has never seen an emperor in his life when he meets with Moctezuma. Even after, in the 40 years after, when he has learned to read and write in the meantime, but he has never met Charles V of Spain. Had he met with Charles V, he would have noticed exactly the same kind of behaviors, the way he behaves or behaved, say, the way the people around him behaved. This is a typical example of what we call misattribution. Bernal Diaz explains Moctezuma's, for him, mysterious behavior by its ethnicity, Indian, while its social status, emperor, is the explanation. So, in a few words, it does not commit an ethnocentric mistake, but a sociocentric mistake. He doesn't see a kind of person he has ever met. And so he misattributes. Of course, it is also part of his political agenda, as we would say today, because he wants to, justify everything they've done over there and that these people really deserve to be, wiped out and so forth. The point is that, again, he chooses the worst possible example and he makes a mistake, and a huge one at that. Now, my question is, how many times per day does each of us make the same mistake? Think about it. Each time we are confronted with a behavior that we do not understand or that we cannot readily explain, we tend to jump on the most immediate, easiest, simplest explanation. Oh, of course, he behaves like that because he's young or because he's old. She behaves like that because, well, she's a woman, or because she's, Asian. And generally, the easiest, the most readily available explanation is plain wrong. However, it can be useful if we are conscious of the mistake, but we use it, say, smartly. I mean, let me share with you an anecdote. More than 30 years ago, I was based in Austria and I was working for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Before going back to academia at Harvard, I worked during almost 30 years as a diplomat. Bilateral first, multilateral after. And back then, so in the early 90s, when in Austria, I was going through a divorce, which is quite common, especially among diplomats, but anyway. And I was talking to a colleague who was also a friend of mine, in the embassy. He was probably 20 years older than I was, and he was divorced already himself, and he had remarried with a Polish lady. And at some stage we spoke, and I told him, you know what, life is so difficult within a couple. Even if the cultural elements are very similar. So I don't understand how you can actually survive as a couple knowing that you and your wife have two different native languages, two different native cultures, etc., etc. And he looked at me with a smile and told me something that I never forgot. Well, obviously I never forgot it because I'm sharing it with you tonight. He said, "Oh, you're so young. You're so young." And I was, "Oh, thank you, Patrick. Okay, what is that?" And he said, "You know what? When your better half is not from the same culture originally as you are, every time there is a problem within the family, within the couple, before the plates are flying through the kitchen, you can always say, hey, wait a minute. We will never agree. We will never understand each other completely because you are Polish and I'm French, or the other way around, or whatever. I mean, you can replace French and Polish by whatever you want." And he added, even if you know that the reason for the dispute or the conflict or the tension has absolutely nothing to do with cultural differences, well, it may happen, really, of course, and it happens. But even if you know that cultural differences have nothing to do with that, blame it on cultural differences and you will see the temperature going down immediately. I was like, oh, this is a very precious piece of advice. Thank you very much. It will be useful. Sometimes I'm confronted when I talk about the brain, which is another of my topics. I'm confronted with people who come to see me after my talks and say, look, I have trouble with my partner. I say, okay, fine. What is that? I mean, come on. But that's because I'm left brain and she's right brain, and we will never, we don't get along because, you know. I say, well, look, first of all, I hope you are full brain, not left brain or right brain. As for me, I consider that I'm full brain, and there is no such thing as left brain people or right brain people. This is complete bullshit. It's a neuromyth. However, if you can rely on that explanation to lower the temperature and bring peace into your home, you know, and you say, oh, come on, look, no, don't get upset. I'm left brain, you're right brain, or the other way around, doesn't matter. That's fine. Only you should know that doesn't make any sense at all. But if it can bring peace, why not? Misattribution. Again, I suspect we do that all the time. All the time. Consider someone who is obsessed by something particular, whatever that is. And suddenly, everything will be attributed to whatever the person is obsessed with. You know what I mean? You know the famous phrase, if the only thing you have at your disposal is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Yeah. If an airplane and a helicopter collide over the Potomac in Washington, D.C., and you are absolutely obsessed by, say, whatever, DEI, then, of course, well, you know what I mean. Another example of ethnocentrism. The neuroscientific approach to dyslexia. Briefly. almost 20 years ago, in the framework of the BRAIN project I was in charge of at the OECD, we were working on what neuroscience understood about dyslexia that could be useful for dyslexic people, to begin with dyslexic children who struggle to learn to read or struggle to read afterwards because of this condition. And something great happened during a meeting we had at Oxford, UK. We gathered some 20 plus neuroscientists from as many countries, 20 plus countries and different languages. And they were all specialized in dyslexia. And after a while, something happened that I really love. I love this kind of situation. It doesn't happen too often, but sometimes it does. That means that we finished the experts meeting with an understanding, an idea, an explanation nobody had when arriving, and everybody had it when leaving. And that was the following. Most of the literature, the scientific literature that had been published about dyslexia back then, I'm talking about, 2005, that was, exactly 20 years ago, had been written after research, obviously, by Anglo-Saxon scientists. Very serious people, very reliable, very sound science, no problem at all. However, they worked constantly with people who were either trying to read or trying to learn to read, the children, in English. And they published a lot of work, again, excellent work, except for one thing. They never, none of them, had the idea to limit the observations to the readers in English. And that was a terrible mistake. That means they generalized based on the English reading people they had observed and studied, not taking into account the fact that English, because of its morphophonological structure, is an extreme among the languages written, alphabetic languages. In the alphabetic languages, you have a spectrum that goes from what we call shallow languages to non-shallow languages. Shallow languages are the languages in which one letter matches with one sound, and one sound matches with one letter. So it's completely transparent, if you wish. One, and so forth. There are quite a lot of languages like that. Finnish is a good example. Spanish is not very far from it. Italian is not very far from it. Turkish is a very good example as well, and so forth. Now, if you move along the spectrum, you reach the languages that are the most non-shallow languages on Earth. Just before the penultimate one is French. Since it is one of my mother tongues, I never really realized that before, but okay. And the second one, the ultimate one, the absolute horror in terms of shallowness, is English. If you want example, just an example, consider the following succession of letters. O-U-G-H in English. O-U-G-H. Enough, through, though, bow, and so forth. If you don't know how to pronounce it, when you see it written, it's over. There is no chance for you to guess. If you see a word written W-I-N-D, is it wind or is it wind? It can be both. Depending on the context, of course, you will guess that it's wind or wind, of course. But if you see the word in isolation, which is definitely what children do when they learn to read in the first place, you cannot decide without the context and so forth. What happens is that for dyslexic people, learning to read in a shallow language is much easier and much less problematic, say, than to read in a non-shallow language, which means that the conclusions the colleagues, the scientists, neuroscientists had come to when studying English readers were perfectly accurate, but only for English readers. They were absolutely wrong for Italian readers, of Turkish readers, of Finnish readers. That was it. Ethnocentric worldview, ethnocentric approach. Nobody had thought about it. So you see, not only the advertising industry, but also scientific research can be, and actually is, very ethnocentric. Think about it. And now I would like to introduce, is it so far so good? Or I just wanted to ask you, so far so good?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, fine, thank you. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce the concepts by Bourdieu. I will start with doxa and habitus, and then after we'll have a short break, and we'll move to capital, and we'll discuss after. Doxa, this is a crucial notion. Pierre Bourdieu, just for as a reminder, some of you may be familiar with his name, especially if you had sociology so far. Bourdieu was a French sociologist, born 1930, died 2002. He was originally a philosopher. He studied philosophy until in the mid-50s he was sent to Algeria, where the Algerian war, decolonization war, was starting, and he was sent there as a, French soldier, not a professional soldier, obviously, but back then, he was drafted and sent to Algeria. And when he was there, he discovered not only a country he did not know and so forth, but a region in the mountains, a region called Kabylie. The language is Kabyle, it's not Arabic. You heard, by the way, singing in Kabyle in the first, when Mong played the music. Thank you very much, Mong, for playing this beautiful piece that I chose to illustrate my course at Harvard in January. In this piece, you hear two ladies singing, one in English, the other one in Breton, a local language of where I am now, and a man singing in Kabyle. Anyway, Bourdieu went to Kabylie and he observed the life in the villages. And he quickly came to the conclusion that the rules of conduct in the villages of Kabylie, so northern Africa, northern Algeria, were very close to what he was used to in his own native village in the French Pyrenees. And that's how he almost from one day to another, almost overnight, changed his academic path from philosophy to sociology. because he thought, okay, there are patterns here that I'm familiar with to some extent, at least, not everything, but to some extent, some patterns are similar to what I have seen and heard and known in my village, even if there is the Mediterranean Sea between the two regions, very different cultures and so forth. Some patterns are similar, and these patterns are of sociological nature. That's how it came to the idea of doxa, which, by the way, had been, it didn't invent the word, obviously. Plato uses it already, so 25 centuries ago. Doxa is, according to Bourdieu, something that we are all sort of immersed in. Most people within a given society are unaware of the arbitrary character of what is accepted or even acceptable or encouraged, recognized, rejected, despised, etc. in that particular society. Because there are rules, but these rules are not written. Spoon-fed with doxa, we tend to consider most artificial things, like social facts and rules, as natural and hence unchangeable. Come back to that. Doxa, in other words, is the box in the expression thinking outside the box. Social or socially constructed and imposed limitation on thought can be described as doxa. Plato, I told you before that he used the notion, opposed doxa and logos. As you certainly know, logos is a very polysemic word. In Greek, means a lot of things, but in that particular case, it means thought, reflection. Doxa, in other words, is culture that is considered nature. Just think about it for a second. Let's make a break here, and we'll come back 5 minutes or 10 minutes from now. Okay? Thank you very much.
5 minutes, we'll come back. Yeah. So let's take a break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at 2:02.
Try to hammer out as much as I can. All good. Good. I'm sorry. I understand where your mouth, your so I'm not saying I'm in charge of the other one, just like this time.
No, it's like.
Feeling all right. Feeling good. Feeling chill. I had a midterm. That's good. That's going good. Doesn't go like Ivy low end.
Yeah, those and like.
Trying to like all the small stuff. Right.
Oh.
That's a like that.
I know, I'm always.
Intro. Saving time later. So my friends. Appreciate that. My friend was on the yellows. Right? He's going to the street, far right building.
Yeah,
And then go one more. Right. And I see,
I mean, that's the fun.
yeah, right. Yeah, right. Well, you gotta keep in mind.
Yeah.
Live on 2 p.m.
Oh, that's my.
Okay, Bruno, I think we can start whenever you're ready. And you may have to unmute your audio.
Right, sorry for
Yes,
this.
yes, we can hear you.
Do you see the?
Yes,
Okay, fine. You see the slide?
yes.
So, okay. I come back to doxa because this is key. If you get the notion of doxa, the rest will follow without any sort of trouble. So, doxa again is the box in the expression thinking outside the box. This is the great thing about English, is that it's very compact. An explanation, it doesn't work with languages where you don't have the expression thinking outside the box. Now, what I'm saying is the following. In each society, no matter how big or how small, you have common perceptions, common representations, common beliefs, common ways of thinking, common worldviews that are shared by definition, because they're common, they are shared by the members of that society, and that the members of that society consider natural, if not universal. But generally they consider it natural because they've always lived with that. So it is not even a question for them whether it could be different or not. And that is the box. Now, what I'm saying is the following. In order to be able to think outside the box, the very first condition to meet is to realize that there is a box. If you do not realize that there is a box, the chances of you thinking outside the box are extremely limited. I'm not saying it's impossible. I say it's very, very limited. And here I have to quote an Egyptian friend of mine who once talking to his compatriots, giving a talk in Cairo or maybe Alexandria, I don't remember exactly where that was, but anyway, said the following: a fish does not know what water is. He was, of course, talking about cultures. I was the only non-Egyptian in the audience, but I was living in Egypt back then, and I realized that what he was telling his compatriots when he suddenly asked, what, do you want to know what Egypt is? And he repeated the question several times, and people were looking at each other, in complete disbelief. Is that, what is he babbling about? We are Egyptians. We live here. We know what Egypt is. And he said, no, you don't. If you want to know what Egypt is, leave. Go to Europe, go to North America, go to Australia, go to China, wherever you want. When you'll come back, you know what Egypt is. A fish does not know what water is. At this very second, and again, that's 40 years ago, I realized that he was also speaking for me. Because it was during my time in Egypt that I realized what it meant to be Western and European. I had lived in 2 different countries, and I had 3 different nationalities in my blood, if you want. But everything European. I had never really left Europe before. I had never, well, a little bit. I had traveled a little bit to America and so forth, but I had never lived in a different water, in a different box, in a different doxa. The moment you realize that the doxa is around you, that you've been immersed in it, that you consider it natural, you don't even question it, then you start to be able to think outside the box. Look at this quote by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Niemand ist hoffnungsloser versklavt als jene, die fälschlicherweise glauben, frei zu sein. Nobody is as enslaved as those who wrongly believe that they are free. That's pretty old, no? 2 centuries ago, probably more, a little bit more. One of our problems in the Western world, as far as I can see, is that part of our doxa is to believe that there is no doxa, that we are free to think, believe, perceive as we see fit. This is terrible. This is the ultimate mental manipulation, the ultimate brainwashing. Look at what Noam Chomsky, our old friend Noam Chomsky, said about that. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. once I was talking to him, and we were discussing about the notions of freedom of speech in the US versus continental Europe, because he had had some trouble with that, and as you may know, and I said, well, look, our notion of freedom of speech is different. There are things that you cannot say in countries like France or Germany or Spain, Italy, the Netherlands. It is not allowed. Speaking positively about Nazism, Nazi policies, wearing swastikas and stuff like that is not allowed where I speak from right now. It is a crime. It is an offense. This is something that is completely alien to the US as far as I can tell. Now, when we discussed, suddenly I said, well, the US sacralizes the freedom of speech in a way that we in Europe never have. And Noam looked at me with a smile and he said, there is no harm done if you sacralize, if you consider that the freedom of speech is sacrosanct, provided the freedom of thought is as limited as it is in the US, which I found extremely interesting. On top of everything, but I'm not saying that freedom of thought is complete here. Don't worry about that. I know exactly that it is not. However, there is this doxa phenomenon, this doxa element around us. What is acceptable and what is not? What can be thought and what cannot? One day, maybe we'll have the opportunity to meet again. I might even come all the way to Santa Barbara. It's been a long time since I haven't been on the West Coast, and we'll talk about different elements that contribute to the limitation of what Noam calls here the spectrum of acceptable opinion. How it works and how we are spoon-fed with this doxa from the cradle on without realizing it, because the rules of doxa are not written anywhere. Now, so you get it. Doxa is a set of perceptions, representations, beliefs, thoughts, opinions, and so forth that are widely accepted within, so widely accepted within a certain group of people that they are considered natural. It is not that people don't want to question them. It is that they don't even think that it's possible to question them. And from there, Bourdieu deducts the concept of habitus. Habitus, according to Bourdieu, emanates or is generated by doxa. That is, doxa are thoughts. They are abstract elements, a set of abstract elements. Habitus is not exactly concrete, but it's close to. It derives from doxa and it generates behaviors. He uses the following expression. For me, it was an eye-opener, but I know that it is not necessarily understood by everybody depending on your background. Bourdieu defines habitus as the generative grammar of our cultural behaviors. I suppose, that not everybody is familiar with the concept of generative grammar. So I will briefly explain what that is. This again comes from Noam Chomsky, That's what he started to develop end of the 50s, early 60s, and with that revolutionized completely linguistics. Chomsky said the following. He said, when a baby, a toddler, say, learns his mother tongue or his mother tongues, maybe there are several, it happens, 2 or 3, the baby does not learn rules, grammatical rules, doesn't learn lists of words, vocabulary, does not learn prosody, accent, phonology, phonetics. The baby simply hears people talk around him, and he or she develops his or her own ability to produce speech. It's not only by imitation, well, partly because the baby will use words heard or constructions, syntactic constructions heard, and so forth. However, there is no rote learning behind that. There are no lessons. There are no rules, not really. Or there are rules, but they are implicit. They are never made explicit, at least in the beginning. Now, what happens is that the baby, the toddler, generates speech and is able to generate an infinity of speeches that are completely original. That means that the toddler does not repeat word for word what he or she has heard. Well, it can happen as a sort of game or joke or whatever, but generally, the speech generated by toddlers, as the speech generated by all human beings, are totally original, except when you quote someone, you generate new sentences, new utterances all the time when you speak, right? This is generative grammar. You have developed, integrated a kind of engine in your brain, and this engine is experience expectant. That means this engine only waits for speech to come to your ears, to go through your brain, the language areas, Wernicke's area, Broca's area, and then you do not regurgitate exactly what you've heard, but you make yours what you've heard and what you've understood, and then after, you generate something original in terms of speech. This is the way Bourdieu describes habitus. Habitus is the engine, the generative grammar of our cultural behaviors. And the same way that we learn our mother tongues, the same way we just listen, receive, record certain things, and then generate our own speech, we observe, register, record cultural behaviors around us. Of course, some rules are explicit. Don't put your feet on the table. Don't play with your food or whatever, Some things are absolutely explicit, but most cultural behaviors are not. They are actually just shown. And again, the baby, the toddler, the young child, the growing child, teenager, adults, they see cultural behaviors, they interpret them, they appropriate them, they sort of integrate them, and then after, they generate their own cultural behaviors. This is habitus. It all comes from the doxa. One of the best examples I've heard of that was in my course a few years ago, where a colleague who took the course, she's Indian American, as you say. That means, well, she was born in the US and raised in the US. But she's of Indian origin. The two parents are Indian. And she was raised in the US, on the West Coast, by the way, Seattle or somewhere in the area. But in an Indian family with Indian values, Indian beliefs, Indian perceptions, and so forth. So Indian doxa. Within the family, she was confronted to the Indian doxa. Within, outside of the family, she was confronted to the American, US doxa. So from the beginning, she was aware of the notion of doxa, even if she didn't have the word, of course, but that's another thing. And then she went to India and spent 2 years there in a village. Being American and being urban, for her, it was a real culture shock. Even if she was familiar with some aspects of Indian culture, it was a real shock to have to live in an Indian village. And she gave the example, the following example. She said the culture shock came from this. In that Indian village, wherever that is exactly, women and men are not equal. Not at all. When there is a gathering of some kind, you know, you invite friends for lunch or whatever, dinner. The roles are clearly defined. The women are in the kitchen, they prepare the food and they serve the food at the table. Men are in the living room and they talk and they drink together and whatever that is. She said, of course, as an American, I was pretty shocked by this hierarchy of genders. Very clear hierarchy of genders. And I disagreed. I deeply disagreed with it. However, almost spontaneously, anytime I was confronted to a situation like that, I went to the kitchen and I served the food. I prepared the food or I helped, preparing the food and I served it. The doxa is women are, if not completely inferior, at least they play an inferior role in society and they have to serve. They play an inferior role. That's doxa. Going to the kitchen immediately when you arrive somewhere and help with the food and serve the food, that is habitus. That is a behavior that is generated by habitus that directly emanates from the doxa. I hope the explanation was clear enough. It is not necessarily as simple as it seems, but I've tried my best now. A few words about the forms of capital. You are certainly more familiar with that, I suspect. The forms of capital, according to Bourdieu, are first and foremost the three forms. Each of us, each and every of us, possesses or owns three forms of capital to begin with, which Bourdieu calls economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. Let me please define each of the forms very briefly. It's very simple. The economic capital is the sort of capital we hear about all the time. Your economic capital is what you own, basically, and more dynamically, how much you make a month, a year, whatever, right? The social capital consists for each of us of the people and the institutions, which we know and to whom we are known. Barack Obama is not a member of my social capital because I know who he is, but as far as I can tell, he doesn't know who I am. Hence, he's not part of my social capital. Institutions, Harvard is part of my social capital because I know Harvard and Harvard knows me. But UCSB is not part of my social capital because I know what UCSB is, but UCSB does not know who I am. Now, maybe from tonight on, maybe a bit more, but you know what I mean. That's social capital, who you know and who knows you. And cultural capital is basically what you know. All right. Now, what Bourdieu tells us is that the three forms of capital tend to work exactly in the same way. Let's take the economic capital, which is the best example because it's the most well-known and it's the simplest. Again, the economic capital is what you own, what one owns, anyone, and how much you make, This economic capital is characterized by a volume, it is more or less big, and a structure, it is more or less diverse. What we know, and this is not from Bourdieu, we knew it before, is that the bigger the volume of your economic capital, the bigger it will become. Or say, the chances, the likelihood. The more you own, the more you will be able to own more. The more diverse your economic capital is, you possess whatever, real estate, a yacht, a jet, whatever, books. The more it is diverse in structure, the more diverse it is likely to become. That we know. At least since Karl Marx, we know it. It's not finished. The economic capital can be inherited or acquired or both. That's quite obvious, right? You inherit an economic capital or not. You acquire an economic capital or not, or both or not. So far, so good, I suspect. Let's move. The social capital, who you know and who knows you, is also characterized by a volume and a structure in terms of diversity. The more people you know, the more likely you are to know more people. It's quite obvious. The more diverse the people you know, the more likely it is that you will get to know more diverse people because of the way social contacts are made. So this works exactly like the economic capital, Same model. The bigger your social capital, the bigger it is likely to become. The more diverse your social capital, the more diverse it is likely to become. Social capital, just like the economic capital, can be inherited or acquired or both. You inherit the social capital from your family to begin with, or a circle of friends or acquaintances, I mean, people you know. You acquire new social capital because you are moving socially in society, and you get in touch with some circles in society that were not particularly or not at all involved in the social capital of your familiar people, or both. Same thing. Now, cultural capital, what you know, is the same. Again, works the same. The more you know, the more likely you are to get to know more. I suspect I don't have to explain that in detail. It is so obvious. The more diverse your knowledge, the more likely it is to become even more diverse. And again, cultural capital can be inherited, can be acquired, can be both. Consider this: the volume, the diversity, how you get to this form of capital. See how this works. Of course, the three forms of capital interact with one another. You can, and in fact you do, invest parts of one capital to acquire another. This is exactly what we are doing in universities. You have to pay in order to attend courses. That means that you give away a part of your economic capital to acquire cultural capital. But not only that, when we are students, we connect with a lot of people around us. Some of these connections will remain until we die. Social capital. Some will not last that long, but it doesn't matter. When you are sitting in a class in a university, could be UCSB or any other university in the world, you are acquiring cultural capital. That's the main reason the university is there. And you are acquiring social capital. And even you could say that you acquire economic capital, not on the spot, because that generally you are paying for that, but it's an investment for the future. Again, that's your cultural capital, and your social capital will help you in the future acquire economic capital. That's the way it works, according to Bourdieu at least. Now, you see the economic capital, the social capital, and the cultural capital here. The economic capital is very strong. The social capital is sort of middle range. The cultural capital is rather low. Can you guess what type, what social type, what kind of social character is precisely characterized by this kind of repartition of capital? Very strong economic capital, middle social capital, and low cultural capital. Can you guess? No? Nobody? Okay, let's try the next one. Maybe if it's the other way around, kind of. Economic capital rather low. Well, I mean, not very strong. Social capital middle, but cultural capital very strong. What kind of social character is that? Or let's put it differently. What kind of profession is generally, again, this is sociology, so we are talking about, not individuals, but big chunks of the population. Which kind of profession is characterized by this repartition of capital? Nobody?
Any guesses? Can you speak louder?
Teacher.
She says
Teacher. Yeah. Excellent. This is exactly what I had in mind when I produced this slide, like yesterday or whatever that was. Now, this is the typical, I'm not saying for every teacher in the world, but this is the most typical representation of a teacher in terms of repartition of capital. Not very strong economically, but not very low either. Social medium, and cultural pretty high compared to the rest of the population. Now back to this. What kind of character is that?
CEO of a company.
Sorry, what was that?
The CEO of a company.
Oh, yes, it could be. It could be. However, I think you should be more precise, because not every CEO falls in that category. Only a specific kind of CEOs. Yeah, but I think you're generally right, but you should be a bit more precise. We all know CEOs who have a very strong cultural capital. It's not wrong, what you said. You're very, very close. You just need one more precision.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, probably maybe Anglo or Caucasian.
I did not hear well. Sorry.
I was talking about going on to his assumption for CEO. If it lacks cultural, then I would say it's probably maybe Anglo or Caucasian CEO.
Ha!
Lacks the
This,
diversity.
yeah, that's a very interesting one. I would say, why not? Why not? And probably true, especially in the US, but more generally. No? I tell you what I had in mind. This to me is the typical representation of a self-made man. The CEO of a company who has no formal education or very, very little. You know what I mean? Economic capital very strong, social capital pretty good, cultural capital very low. These are just two examples like that, but you can characterize people exactly with these kinds of models. Now, according to Bourdieu, there is one more thing that is important. The forms of capital evolve over time. That means that you are not, well, you are born with the capital or the forms of capital you inherit, that's right, but it evolves over time. And that would be the typical for 20 years of age, rather low in 3 categories, right? That would be the typical thing for 40 years of age. And that would be the typical thing for 60 years of age. Now, I say typical, but it is not true for everybody, of course. I mean, there are tons of exceptions. My economic capital was much stronger when I was 40 than now that I'm 60. It's partly the result of a personal choice. I hope that my cultural capital is growing every day. I'm not completely sure how long it will last, though. And my social capital is, well, I've neglected it a little bit over the last years. So that means that it is maybe not as mobilizable as it used to be. And that means that the social capital I'm talking about, if you lose touch with people, at some stage, they used to be part of your social capital, but they are no longer part of your social capital. The same thing happens with your economic capital. If you do not invest it and invest it in a smart way or whatever that is, you may lose some of your economic capital or all of it. And the same thing for the cultural capital. You hear quite often people saying, oh, when I was in school or when I was an undergrad or when I was a student more generally, I knew all this, but I've forgotten, that sort of things. It evolves over time. The relationships between doxa, habitus, and capital are extremely complex. And I share with you here a cartoon that has been produced by one colleague who took my course a few years ago. And he represented doxa as the cloud, that hangs over our heads. It rains habitus, which I found great. I love this idea of habitus raining down from the doxa. And people basically drowning in the high water or whatever that is, or ocean, and the capital being a form of lifeboat. Why not? I thought it was I wouldn't say funny because I'm not sure it's that funny, but it is witty. And there is something to be done with that. However, if it doesn't speak to you, don't worry about it. Create your own cartoon and present the whole thing differently. That's just fine. All right, now, what time is it? Do we still have time? No, we don't have time anymore. Okay, so I will skip that. See another guessing game, but it will be for the next time. Now, okay. I like this balloon. It's not a brain, it's a balloon. Look, I like it. It's fun. Now, if we have a bit of time left, let's brainstorm. And if not, I'm sure Mong will find a way to have you discuss or all this or integrate it into his teaching. This is what I suggested, but I don't think we have time for that. Sorry for having been that long. I'm tired. It's late here, Now, I wanted to invite you to gather examples of doxa from your respective cultures, gather examples of habitus from your respective cultures, put them in, put the relationship between the two if you can, but not absolutely necessary, and share with the others. I think it's interesting to do that sort of exercise, and I'm pretty sure you're able to do that and to generate great examples. Doxa, as Plato said, is the opposite of logos. It is the opposite of thought, because it is imposed on us as a limitation of thought. That's probably why Bertrand Russell said most people would sooner die than think. In fact, they do so. Very difficult to translate in any language because of the double meaning of sooner here, but I like this kind of witty quote. Last thing I wanted to share with you tonight is a longer quote by Bertrand Russell. I won't read it aloud. I leave it for you to think about. In a way, it is for most of us, more actual than ever. Thank you very much for your attention, for your patience, for your understanding. And I remain here if there are any questions, remarks, challenges, criticisms, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, for your, again, very insightful and great presentation to help our students learn about these topics. We have 5 minutes. Anyone have a question for Bruno or like to know more?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. This is more of like a personal question. You mentioned that you were a diplomat for many years, and then you made the transition
Right.
into academics. Can you share a little bit about
Yes.
why the transition? What happened? Was it an experience and a teacher or a lecture or something? Why did you make that transition?
Oh, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. I will try to answer it as briefly as I can. When I finished my doctoral studies, I was 28, and I was wondering whether I was to go to the diplomatic path, diplomatic career, or academic. And I was unable to make a decision because I saw relatively well, as far as I can tell, in hindsight, the pros and cons of each. So, unable to make a decision, I decided to just let it happen. And I thought, okay, the first ones who come to get me, they will have me. And the diplomats were faster. So I was hired by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I worked for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Egypt, Mexico, and Austria. Finally, I had to come back to Paris because I had been more than 12 years on the road. And it's the rule, you have to come back to Paris. The diplomats generally call that the purgatory. Nobody wants to go back to the ministry for a few years. But I was lucky, and I was hired as the diplomatic advisor of the then president of the French Senate. That's what I did. I stayed there 4 years, and after I was hired by the OECD. So, diplomat again, but multilateral. I was no longer working for France, but for the 30 member countries back then. However, I had run into difficulties several times. Very quickly again, I do it as fast as I can. There is something terrible. If you are a diplomat, the most uncomfortable situation you can possibly imagine is when you are in an embassy and you're supposed to represent the positions of your country, but you disagree with your government. You are not supposed to disagree. I mean, you can disagree privately. When I was in Austria, the problem started with the war in former Yugoslavia. I totally disagreed with the position of France, of the French government back then. And, I was trying to escape journalists and whatever in order not to have to take position publicly. But I had to do it sometimes. So that was the kind of problems. That is an example. Then after, at the OECD, there was another thing. During the first part of my 12 years there, I worked on a brain project, and that was fine. It was half diplomacy and half research, and that was fine. In the second part of my 12 years, when I worked on languages, it was much more difficult because the political side of things was stronger, and the OECD was moving more and more and more a conservative path, to say the least. So at the end of the day, I really disagreed with a lot of things there. At some stage, I was invited to, that was in 07, I was invited to give a course, a semester course, full semester at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And of course, I accepted the invitation. And when I spent this full semester, 07, there, I was very happy. I loved it. I realized how much teaching had been something I had dearly, sorely missed. I hadn't taught really in 20 years, and that was, so anyway. So during a few years, I stayed with one foot at the OECD and one foot at Harvard. And finally, I decided to quit the OECD and quit the diplomatic path and focus on academic stuff, especially teaching. So this is a very short summary, but that's basically my path, yeah. And I never regretted it, by the way. I never regretted it.
Thank you, Bruno, so much. And I know this is midnight at Paris now. So he stayed up so late, and please give a big hand to Bruno again.
Thank you very much for your attention and everything.
Thank you, Bruno.
And see you soon. Have a good day in California.
Yes.
One mute.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bruno.
So. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And we will have a question on this presentation in the discussion forum. So you will say again, stay dry and submit your assignment. Please. Okay. I'll tell you. Okay. Have a good one. Bye.
Will we have a discussion post, or is it just yes and like?
Oh no, we'll have a discussion post. But
We will.
yeah, what I will do is since you it's due on Saturday, so I will try to see if we can make it like one more extra day for you discussion. So maybe we can put it on Sunday.
That definitely be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we'll do it that way. So good question though. You asked good question. So
Thank you.
I mean, for his response, right? I think that many professions fall into this category.
Definitely.
But the teachers, I'm a teacher now, is teachers fall into that category.
It was the no economic capital that made, oh, it's teachers.
Right. You don't become billionaire in teaching.
I'm a preschool teacher, so I know.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank you.
I explained, I have a different section, I have a summer section.
So-
When we talked about having another paper that, yeah, because like, in this other, this, it's good position. Yeah, I mean, like history, so like. I don't know, like, what's your question? Our question is, she in section was given a partner. Yeah, I know, and just when